Hello, welcome everyone. Fergus Nichol here with the BBC's Business Matters. Yes, we're devoting this entire edition to China. Welcome to Business Matters. Let's welcome Andy Xie, an old friend of the programme, joining us from Shanghai. Andy, independent economist. Good to have you with us, Andy. How are you?
Good, good.
Excellent. Let's get started. Over the past 10 months, the world has learned a new language of disease, the specifics of viral infection and its global spread. Then the impact on our economies, our livelihoods, our families. It hit business in China as hard as anywhere. An era of uninterrupted growth dating back to the 1970s was brought to a halt. But then came a remarkable bounce back. So much so, in fact, that analysts at the Economist intelligence unit now expect the Chinese economy to be around the same size in 2021 as they predicted back in 2019. Just let that sink in for a moment. If we use this, albeit crude, yardstick, for China, it's almost like the epidemic never happened. But COVID-19 has still left scars on the world's second biggest economy. Let's bring in our guests then to give us a reflection from where they are. Andy, in Shanghai, we heard that it was really local business only. Is that your experience, or are things now opening up and more joint ventures, etc., are able to get back up to speed again?
Well, I think that it's getting back to normal, but it's not the same. And I see that maybe half of the people on the street wear masks now, so maybe it's a sign of confidence. But still, people wear masks, people are jittery, and there's no tourism, and foreign business people cannot come to Shanghai. Shanghai is China's international hub, so obviously it has a big impact.
Does that mean, I was going to ask, is this a purely internal recovery? The suggestion is that China's not ready to trade again globally.
I think that the Chinese government wants to lock down the country. The Chinese government understands how to control inside. If you want to buy cold medicine now, and your face gets scanned, the government knows who is getting cold medicine. So they can trace where the virus might be breaking out. So they have confidence that they can keep the control inside, but they don't know how to deal with outside. That's why the country is locked down.
Let's turn now to Hong Kong, since 1997 a special administrative region of China. Hong Kong began 2020 in recession, emotionally battered by the violent pro-democracy demonstrations of the previous year. Then the virus hit, but spikes of infection were mostly well managed and fatalities were kept low. Halfway through the year, Beijing secured a tighter grip on the territory by passing a new security law. Andy, listening in Shanghai, how do you assess the government's view of Hong Kong? Because sometimes it looks like it's a kind of recalcitrant child that needs to be disciplined.
Well, I think the government has changed its view recently that Hong Kong is more a threat than an asset. I think that this new thinking is leading to this the new approach that Hong Kong will be governed much more like a Chinese province, and the government representative in Hong Kong will have tremendous influence. Probably final say over many matters. That's the reality right now.
Right. When you say threat, is that a fear that perhaps people elsewhere in mainland China will say, well, if they could do that in Hong Kong, and that's a city in China, why don't we do it in this city in China?
Oh, absolutely. I think that especially across the border in Guangdong, where people speak the same language. So I think that for the Chinese government, it's always stability, national unity, far outweigh other issues, including economy. So I think that on Hong Kong, it's unlikely they will back down.
On the business side, when I was last in Hong Kong, people were saying, look, this is the brilliant place for Chinese businesses to get into the global marketplace and vice versa. Is that just no longer applicable?
Yeah, I think that Hong Kong's role as China's window was always exaggerated. Why would China need a window, right? After joining the WTO, the whole China was open to business. And so I think that the Hong Kong value to China has been declining for many years. And Hong Kong has its own problems. Its education system is not very good. Young people cannot speak Mandarin or English properly, so it's not easy for them to have opportunities. So I think that the perception that Hong Kong, because of this national security law, Hong Kong has been diminished greatly. No, we can debate about the merit of the security law, but Hong Kong has been diminishing itself for many, many years.
Hello, welcome back. Fergus Nichol with Business Matters, in which today we're devoting the whole hour to China. 2 weeks ago, President Xi Jinping addressed a virtual gathering called the Climate Ambition Summit. It was 5 years, he said, since world leaders had shown utmost political resolve and wisdom and adopted the Paris Agreement on climate change. He reminded his listeners of his own previous pledge to achieve carbon neutrality by 2060. Now, he said, China was ready to go further, faster. He sketched out a series of commitments on carbon dioxide emissions, the share of non-fossil fuels in primary energy consumption, tree planting, and on wind and solar power capacity, all to be delivered by 2030. The proof of that commitment will come when the Chinese Communist Party signs off on its 14th five-year plan, which sets the course of future government policy. Andy, do you agree with that?
The first is that this carbon neutrality makes China relevant to the world, and China wants to be a good player. So the Chinese government will emphasize this for years to come. In terms of how to implement that, I think that they're still trying to figure it all out. I think that China will do it. The reason is because the party wants to be accepted by the world. And this is one thing that makes it possible. But in terms of how to do it, I think that eventually renewables are good. It's now a few percentage points. And if you work hard, it could go to maybe 10%, maybe higher. But it's not going to be the bread and butter. This is really about nuclear versus coal in China. China does not want to become dependent on foreign technology, so that's why they will decide to do it only when domestic technology has become mature. So this is where I think the date they are waiting for, when the domestic nuclear power industry is mature, and they can churn out the nuclear power plants like coal-fired power plants. Then that's the starting point for China to become carbon neutral.
Hold on to that thought about China being a good player, as you put it, Andy, on the global stage. But one more quick thing. We tend to assume that China is rich, that the sort of sovereign wealth fund, as it were almost bottomless. I wonder whether that's still the case, Andy.
No, I think that the people think China is rich because the number is big. It's like trillions of dollars. But compared to the population, it is not. $3 trillion or $4 trillion, depending on how you count it. It's not a big number compared to 1.4 billion people. You look at Japan. Japan's net foreign asset is over $2 trillion, and Japan has 126 million people. So this is a much wealthier country. Of course, China started much later than Japan, so it takes a much longer for China to accumulate so much wealth. But I think that China has been squandering a lot of money. You see a lot of kind of superficial stuff being absorbing a lot of money. But the Chinese government thinks that accumulating wealth is important, but far more important is political sustainability. So everything must be looked through this prism. So this is why I think that this carbon neutrality, this objective is really political. They will spend whatever it takes.
This is Business Matters on the BBC World Service. Today's edition devoted to China, how the nation has fared in 2020 and what we might expect in 2021. A few moments ago, I mentioned Xi Jinping's recent speech to the Climate Ambition Summit. In his opening remarks, he made comments about global solidarity.
We need to close ranks and make new advances in climate governance that features cooperation and win-win. In meeting the climate challenge, no one can be aloof, and unilateralism will get us nowhere. Only by upholding multilateralism, unity, and cooperation can we deliver shared benefits and win-win results for all nations.
Andy, to you first in Shanghai, do you have a definition of Shiism?
Well, I think that China's political system is about ensuring the survival of the Communist Party. Also, everything else is secondary. So I think that in that regard, Shiism is the same as before. Whatever reforms at home, whatever foreign policy is taken abroad, they all work towards the goal of ensuring the survival of the Communist Party.
Can I ask you about trade before we go? We touched on it right at the beginning when we talked about the limitations now on foreign business people coming into Shanghai, for example, and the impact of COVID. That will, we hope, dilute or diffuse as the months go by. But we talked, Andy, so many months about the US-China trade war. What do you think will happen with Joe Biden in the White House?
Well, I think the trade war hasn't worked for the U.S. Chinese exports to the United States are up and up. So I think that shows that the Chinese government's strategy of being the factory of the world, selling cheap stuff works. So I don't see that Biden will continue. And maybe he says he's tough, but I really doubt it. I think the Chinese government is sitting on something pretty good. The world likes cheap Chinese products.
Right. So China hasn't been busily looking for alternative markets in the meantime, as the Americans have been stroppy during the Trump years.
Yeah, I think that there's just only one strategy in China in terms of economics. People like cheap stuff, and when you have a pandemic, they get a helicopter money from the governments. Then they buy Chinese products, and when the economies are good, they have money. They buy Chinese products. So no matter what, China wins.
One more quick trade question, Andy, while I've got you with us. We've seen Australia now saying we're going to take China to the WTO over the tariffs that have been imposed. And I guess it goes back to the point that we've revisited over the last hour, that China will do these things on its own terms.
Yeah, I think that the WTO doesn't work really. Many countries took the United States to the WTO before. I think that China doesn't really pay attention to that. China is setting Australia as an example for any country that wants to take a side. This is a kind of a traditional Chinese approach. You kill a chicken and show it to the monkeys. So they'll drive Australia all the way to the ground. That's the way it's going to be.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure having you with us on Business Matters as we've looked at different aspects of China during 2020 and into the coming year. Our thanks to the independent economist Andy Xie from Shanghai. Wherever you're listening, have a very happy new year, and we'll see you in 2021.